Okay, so hi, welcome back. I'm Devraj. This is Mysticism in the Body. We're back with the Esoteric Tarot, and today we're going to look at key 2, the High Priestess. These are the keys from builders of the Adytum, created something like 90 years ago, I believe. And to me, they're the only meaningfully esoteric deck. And by that I mean that they do have a at least relatively well articulated esoteric function, living in these sort of ultra-narcissistic quasi-end times of the 2020s or mid-2020s. It is the belief of the average individual that their personal opinions about anything are massively important, and I myself am victim to these kinds of ideas, and consequently people look at all the different types of tarot keys and decide which one looks the best to them, which is okay, but completely overlooks the fact that the symbology of the key is what creates the change, and how it appears in your unconscious mind. Consequently, you may or may not like the look of the High Priestess key or any of the other keys, but you know that this isn't really of significance unless you can articulate exactly what Esoteric Tarot is meant to do and why it isn't doing it. And this kind of cuts into, you know, the basic question, like what is Esoteric Tarot meant to achieve? I made a video about this last week. Feel free to look that up. But, you know, just to get really practical here, you know, working with the keys, essentially what we're doing is learning to build them up in our mind's eye. So you spend a lot of time looking at the key, taking the key in, doing it for a while, doing something else, coming back to it again later on. You learn a bit about the attributions and the symbology, as we've been doing in this series. But mostly through constantly taking it in, it starts to create an impression inside your mind, and you develop the capacity to build it up in your mind's eye, either with your eyes open or your eyes closed. And this has two useful functions, one of which is esoteric and one of which is psychological. The psychological function is that because our unconscious mind, you know, if you're familiar with Carl Jung and his concepts of a symbolic unconscious, a group unconscious, collective unconscious, filled with symbols, by putting this key in your conscious mind, you create a connection to the deep unconscious. As you learn to build the key up in your mind's eye, so you stir something up in your deep unconscious. And the useful effect of this is kind of like, it's loosening, it's like cleaning out a drain. If you imagine your self-consciousness to be a channel, one valid way of looking at it, you know, kind of like a drain pipe. The drain pipe can be clear, so energy, whatever, can flow through it, or the drain pipe can be blocked up with all sorts of, you know, misprocessed or underprocessed traumatic events, cultural conditioning, all that stuff that we all go through. And if what you're doing at the top of the pipe activate something at the very bottom of the pipe, it's a bit like someone's kind of whacking on the bottom of the pipe, and some of the gungy stuff that's inside of the pipe can be loosened up. I had quite a powerful experience of this happening, of a real sense of energetic flow happening when I was visualizing keys back in the late 90s when I first got into this work. And that really instilled in me the possibilities of this kind of approach. As it happened, you know, I just did this kind of Builders of the Adytum key visualization stuff for a couple of years, that realized that I needed to do a great deal more intense therapy. You know, it was going to take me several lifetimes to clear what was inside my own personal pipe, simply by doing a tarot visualization. So I jumped into the most extreme therapies I could for about a decade. But nevertheless, the concept is sound. There is this psychological function to working with the keys. They do activate stuff in your unconscious mind because they are pre-existing there. Or some of the symbolic elements contained in them are pre-existing there. And you don't necessarily need to understand the symbology, you know, cognitively. It does its thing anyway. Of course, there's nothing wrong with understanding the symbols. Can be quite interesting as well. So in this kind of practice, we're using our mind like a channel. As we looked at the other week, like the magician, you know, channeling something and putting this key up here, and it's kind of activating something down here. It's a little bit different from the key, but the channel concept remains. It's acting like a kind of drain cleaner. So that's the psychological function. Then on the esoteric level, learning to build up these keys in your mind's eye and then also place them on the cube of space, which we've been doing. You're creating like a kind of deep object deep inside your mind, which means, you've got a ton of information that's being constructed and placed into this visual object inside of your mind, this cube of space. It's a little bit like, if you're familiar with other esoteric schools, John Dee's Holy Table, the principal thing that he used to conjure up spirits and stuff like that. It's covered in all sorts of esoteric letters and shapes and sigils and all that kind of thing. And when you learn the 22 trumps and you begin to place them inside the cube of space, which you build up around you in your mind's eye, it does a similar thing. But I would say in a more gentle fashion. This is not like the kind of heavy old grimoire goetic magic, where you're dealing with all sorts of mad demons offering you stuff. It's a bit more gentle. Dr. Case, who created the school, was of a notoriously kind of gentle disposition. It didn't take much, it seems, to spin him out. So his version of like John Dee's Holy Table, the cube of space, is a more gentle way of operating, but equally deep, in my opinion. So as well as inviting kind of energy from the universe and different areas of the unconscious mind, these keys also act like a program which goes into your unconscious mind, actually into your body, actually into your gut in places, and starts to create change. The constant suggestions that each key gives to your unconscious mind start to allow Kundalini energy to flow, usually symbolized as a red color, the Mars force, and allows your body to start absorbing sunlight from food. A process of enlightenment or illumination. So that's some of the esoteric stuff, that what these keys are about. Before we get into the actual attributions of the key and the symbology, let's just look at its place on the cube of space. A super important glyph, of which I don't have a particularly great diagram, but we've been looking at the keys in the order so far that they are placed on the cube. And the cube has 3 axes, of course. So we've looked at Judgment, which fits here, key 20. We've looked at the Hanged Man, key 12, which goes along this, east to west, front to back. And we've looked at key 0, the Fool, which goes above to below. And then after doing these 3 axes, we're starting on the 6 faces and the center point, which are assigned to the planets. If all this feels like too much information, just ignore bits of it and continue along. It will gel inside of you if you just keep going. So last week we looked at key 1, the Magician, which is placed above, and it's placed above facing down because you envision yourself as in the center. And this week we're going to look at key 2, the High Priestess, which is placed on the lower face, again facing up. So imagine that if you're kind of in your mind's eye looking down, you're sitting on it like a carpet, or it's underneath you. All that said, let's get to the key itself, the High Priestess. So let's look a little at the attributes here. So it's key 2, which means it's the 3rd key in the tarot deck, which means it's assigned to the 3rd Hebrew letter, Gimel. And Gimel in Hebrew or in Arabic, it means a camel. And you might not get the immediate kind of correspondence there, but essentially what I think it's saying is that, like, the camel at the time, a few thousand years ago and all that in the Middle East, was the main way that you had for transporting things around the country. You loaded them on your camel and you went with your camel off to Damascus, to Cairo, to Baghdad, to Judea, wherever. The camel was a mechanism of transportation. It was a carrier. So in a sense, you could envision it rather like a carrier wave. Back when I was a kid, you had these radio channels. My dad would have like a radio set, with batteries in it, and you would tune it into a certain channel and you would get music or someone telling you the news. And this could only happen because there was a waveform, and then the information, the extra information, was placed on top of the waveform. Without the waveform, you wouldn't get the information. And so, this Gimel kind of refers to this aspect of the key, that of a means of communication. And something here which is sort of ever present and which can be harnessed to communicate. On the Tree of Life, we will find this key between Keter, the crown, and Tipperet, beauty. So it's part of this central pillar. You know, it's like this deep channel between the kind of assumed Godhead. There's different ways of envisioning the Sephirah, whether you're in the Jewish tradition or Hermetic European tradition. And the kind of sun, this kind of concept of Tipperet, sun as in S-O-N. On the cube of space, as we've just seen, it's the bottom, it's the below, the lower face. And then also with the High Priestess, in terms of the astrological signs and planets and elements, it's assigned to the moon. One of the planets, as it was conceived by the ancients, one of the 7 planets. And the moon has forever been associated with mystery, with the feminine, with the divine feminine. Moon has been a subject of worship for many, many thousands of years. Now let's get to the symbology. So the central figure of the High Priestess, seated in the middle on a cube of grey stone. She's got a kind of blue-purple robe over a white top. She's got this kind of equal-armed cross in the middle of her chest. She's got a hat which is a little bit reminiscent of a full and waning and waxing moon. Strange-looking hat. It looks like, I don't think this is her hair, this is some kind of white cloth, part of her headpiece. She's carrying a scroll which is mostly closed up, a little bit open, on which the word Torah is written. And her robe seems to be kind of almost dissolving into this ocean at her feet. We see a bit of yellow, probably some sand here. On her right side, as she's seated, we see this black column, pillar, with the Hebrew letter Beth on it. It's got a kind of lotus top phallic symbol. On her left side, as she's seated, there's a white pillar, very similar in shape, with the Hebrew letter Yod on it. And behind her, you can see this rather frail, flimsy cloth that's hanging, with some pomegranates and some palms. Pomegranates seem to be aligned rather like the kind of Sephirah on the Tree of Life. So one of the overall symbols of this key really is virginity. The idea of something unmanifest, but an act of penetration could create manifestation, but that hasn't happened. So this vast unmanifest is the essential symbol, which is a symbol in pretty much, I think, any esoteric system. I'm not some kind of anthropologist, but usually you've got some kind of symbol for a vast unmanifest, a prakriti, in the Hindu Vedic system. This sense of some universal unmanifest substance. And this virginal quality to it, this fact that it hasn't created anything yet, it hasn't given birth to anything yet, is also mirrored in this rather hymen-like flimsy cloth behind her. The fact that she's wearing white, and yet she's not some sort of virginal teenager, young woman. She's obviously older, so she really is personifying this unmanifest. And one of the things I think with the unmanifest is like, it's good not to make it just too much of a concept. This is one key of 22 keys, and you can put it in its little box, but it's actually pointing at something radically different from the other keys and the other numbers. It's pointing to this idea of a kind of universal substance, cosmic mind stuff, Dr. Case calls it, which can give birth. And just trying to introspect on what that might look like will not to the rational mind be particularly fulfilling, because you're unlikely to find a meaningful answer. Nevertheless, it is a useful practice. What does it mean to be unmanifest? Where might the unmanifest be? Spending a little time introspecting on these questions can be very useful. It can take you deeper. Now, this scroll has the word Torah upon it, which is usually understood as referring to the Jewish Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the Old Testament. And we've got a kind of tree of life on this hymen-like cloth behind her. And so the association here is kind of a little bit in line perhaps with Jewish Kabbalah and the idea that the Torah, the actual letters and words of the Torah, are used to speak creation into existence. If you look before this word abracadabra, as I speak, I create, or I create as I speak. But that's not, that's not fully pushed in here. We don't have an H on the Torah, so it also could be conceived of as like rota or tarot, which are anagrams of this word. And of course, there's this famous old kind of esoteric little saying, tarot rota, or rota tarot, orat Torah. The tarot speaks the law. So we have this concept here of like intrinsic patterning to existence in both these symbols, but there's a bit of gap in there as well, I think, which is a good thing. People often write to me these days, what with the various dramas and horrors going on in the Levant, and say they don't wish to, they want to study Kabbalah, but they don't want to be associated with a Jewish tradition, which I guess is understandable. So this idea that the universe is actually kind of hard-coded with Jewish symbology is obviously a bit distasteful to them. And there actually is quite some evidence to show that some of the most basic Jewish texts actually kind of grabbed from like old Greek and Egyptian stuff as well. So I don't think you need to have your own mind too hard-coded with the concept that we're living in a kind of Torah-patterned universe, and that's hard-coded into the simulation, so to speak. I don't think you need to be too concerned with that. Moving on, we can see that the High Priestess's robe is kind of part of the ocean. So this also fits in with the symbols. A little bit of sand here, maybe. She's dissolving into the ocean. She's coming out of the ocean as well. And the ocean, again, like the camel, is this symbol of a means of communication, a universal kind of fluid, undifferentiated mind stuff which can take different forms. And then the other, I think, significant feature here are these two pillars, a little bit like the pillars on the Tree of Life, on the pillar of mercy and the pillar of severity. These letters stand for Boaz and Joaquin. I think in Masonic folklore you'll find these pillars as well. And really, to me, what they stand for here is it's pointing to the kind of dialectical nature of reality. That, to get development, inevitably we're thrown into different kind of belief systems, different kind of situations in life. I think two of the most powerful poles of the dialectic that we're all in are this concept of like, who are we as an individual and who are we as part of a group? It's kind of easy to just struggle to be an individual against the group pushing away, or it's kind of easy to be desperate to fit in with the group and to push away your individuality. And all the emotions that these kind of entanglements with the family and with society that they bring up, all the emotions that it brings up stuff from your unconscious. It's a cleaning process. So these two dialectics, it's almost as though some force in the universe keeps them in place. Who you are as an individual, who you are as a group is not the only dialectic that we'll find in our lives. There are many, many dialectics. Who are we as a rich person? Who are we as a poor person? Who are we as a worker? Who are we as a boss? But these two pillars, they do point to this intrinsically dialectical nature of human existence. And I think, this is good to understand. If I was to try and answer the question, what is spirituality? What makes a person spiritual? It's like you've given up believing that if you change the world, it will make much difference. I'm an old man, I'm 65 years old, and my mind can get very political, as do old men's brains, But there is somewhere underneath that a knowledge that, it's not going to work. Simply changing the outside does not necessarily really create any real change. And I think intrinsic spirituality comes when you've really been in the outside world. You've seen all this stuff that goes on. You've been massively emotionally invested and entangled in the reality of the outside world. And you've come to see that it's more of a developmental journey for yourself rather than a kind of fight to make the world a certain way. And then finally, I think the other thing to really say about the High Priestess is she, of all the tarot keys, she's really like an object of worship also, an object of devotion. Whether you consider her to be Prakriti, Purusha, the prima materia, the cosmic mind stuff, whatever, most religions or spiritual systems, that they kind of look at that with devotion. Buddhists sometimes chant, I am nothing, I am nothing. And there's this attempt by the sort of egoic self, you know, in these kind of devotional acts to transcend itself and to bind with the universal mind stuff, the undifferentiated mind stuff, to dissolve in that. And of course, at an egoic level, if that starts to happen, you know, it creates a lot of fear. Who am I if I just dissolve into this unvariegated ocean of being? So this is a powerful key. And often, you know, deep inside the egoic mind is this desire to simply surrender, to be consumed by something else, something greater than ourselves. And to just see if we re-emerge and in what form. Diving into the ocean, do we pop up again? And will we be different for the experience? So those are just some of the ideas that I have around this High Priestess key. As a couple of former chaos magicians, Duncan Barford and Alan Chapman, you know, have put out, I've heard them say, you know, you can use these kinds of, they were using chaos magic to try and create awakening, and they said it kind of worked. And likewise, I believe you can use meditating on these keys, the kind of deep symbols, the way that the symbols in the key can start to activate stuff deep in your unconscious to forward a kind of dissolution of the ego. So do please take time to, you know, learn this key. Yes, the attributes and the symbology is fascinating, but also just how the key looks, impressing it on your mind so that you can bring it into your mind's eye at will and see how many seconds you can hold it there. I find it very hard. My mind just jumps away, whether I'm doing it with eyes closed or eyes open, but I just stick with it. And I think, you know, that just keeping going is really the key to pretty much anything in life, to be honest. You know, you just keep going. You have a feeling you're not doing it right. You have a feeling that other people are doing it better. You have a feeling that you'll never get it right and it's just too much. But despite all of these thoughts and self-judgments, you just keep going anyway. And at some point, you know, the universe starts to give it to you. That's how it kind of works, I think. Anyway, that's all I really want to say about the High Priestess that I can think of. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you would like to really go on a journey with Esoteric Tarot, then I do recommend my book, Opening the Body with the Cube of Space, which contains bioenergetic and physical exercises to move energy within you, and also breathwork exercises to do the same. And you also will be building up these keys and learning how to place them on the Cube of Space as you go along. So check that book out if this approach intrigues you. And otherwise, I will see you again shortly for some more Esoteric Tarot. Thank you very much.